All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Zeki Hamid. I'm the Director of Community Engagement. I run the Community Engagement Department. About a year ago, StoryCorps got in touch with us and said, hey, you know what? We've worked with you on some things before, and we have this program that we would love for KUOW to participate in. And they explained the program. And then consulted with my team, Kamna and Alex, and they were very heavy on the project, and they convinced me that this is a worthwhile thing to do. I'm a huge fan of talking across differences. So I thought, hey, you know what? This might be a good thing. So we decided to go for it. And it's, getting towards the end of the program now, and I think we've had some incredible results. So Alex Rochester and Kamna Shastri, they are community engagement producers, and they have really taken the lead on this project. So this would never have happened without them. So I'm eternally grateful for both of you for this. So the way the evening is going to go, I'm going to ask them a few questions just about the process, and then I'm going to depart, and then we have some participants that are going to come and talk about their experience, and we're also going to see some a few videos. And speaking about videos, I think we should see the first one right now. We do. So we weren't the only ones participating in this project. We were one of 5 hub stations across the US, and so we have a video of you for you all that has clips from conversations across the country over the course of the last 8 months. Let's take a look.
I am in Augusta, Maine.
I'm located in Petaluma, California.
I am living in White Pigeon, Michigan.
I am in Bremen, Indiana.
And I am in Redmond, Washington.
What made you want to do this interview today?
I love people's stories, especially stories that are really radically different than my own.
I think in a community such as Jackson, I really think it's valuable to seek out these kinds of opportunities.
It's like the easiest conversation to have because you can connect with someone with pretty little risk. I've never met you before. If this conversation went horribly, then we don't ever have to talk to each other again. It's not like I'm going to see you at Thanksgiving. But if it goes well, you just made a new friend.
I just sent my friend a birthday card and it had cake, and it's like less politics, more cake. And, but that's how we get along.
My name is Sherwin Lee. I am actually 33 as of today.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I think just getting to know people who come from a different background, come from different belief systems and different walks of life, that's really the key to humanizing people that you might disagree with.
Craig, could you briefly describe in your own words your personal political values?
I would say generally conservative, but likewise socially liberal.
Looking back on it, I grew up in a very conservative community.
I grew up in California, very liberal community.
Totally.
My whole family, at least my immediate family, is very liberal, and I grew up in a bubble.
I have been accused of being too liberal for my conservative friends and too conservative for my liberal friends.
As a raving moderate, I'm annoyed with people on both sides.
Maybe we have to change those words. Liberal and conservative, maybe we need to define them better when we have conversations. What does that actually mean?
A lot of the times today, there's a lot of labels that go around.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Labels are the worst thing that we can do to anybody.
Yeah, I agree.
We certainly both seem to be more open to talking to people of different beliefs than I think maybe I expected.
I don't know who I expected you to be, but I'm delighted with who you are. I'd go out for coffee with you in a minute.
We have more in common than people think.
It's part of the human condition, right?
I hope that I get to meet more people like you that I haven't met before, but who still make me feel like change is possible.
The thing that I took away from this experience is more just like you.
Yeah.
And it's been really nice to sit here and you talk to me like a human.
I hope for the future that we could continue having conversations like this and we can work towards something that works for everyone.
Hope is what we all need.
Okay, that was a nice little feel-good video, wasn't it? All right, so I want to ask Kamna and Alex some questions about really the process, because when we first started, it was we were warned about sometimes it might be difficult to get people who might disagree with each other signing up. I talked to our news director who came from Alabama and from Birmingham, and she said, yeah, we participated in this project a long time, but we had a really hard time finding conservatives, and that was in Alabama. So we knew that we had kind of our work cut out for us. So let me ask you this question. Give us a little bit about behind the scenes process. I'm very interested in the outreach. What did you do?
Yeah, so we knew that we would have to build trust with people. This is a very vulnerable thing to say, hey, I'm open to talking to a stranger. Please put me with somebody I'm not going to hate, who's also not going to be a threat to me in any way. And so we were very considerate in explaining a couple of things about the program. One, it would be recorded, but you wouldn't have to use your name and you wouldn't have to share it with anybody if you didn't want to at the end. And two, everybody that signed up for the program, it didn't matter what their political beliefs were. They had to be respectful and they had to be able to listen to one another and truly be curious about understanding the other side. And so that is what we looked for in the people that signed up. Were they coming into this project to just tell us what they thought and just share opinions, or did they want to truly connect with somebody? And it turns out there's a lot of people across the political spectrum that do want to do that. We were very encouraged by how many people signed up for this project.
Kamna, talk to me a little bit about there's an art to a conversation, and these conversations were highly structured. So if you can just address that a little bit.
Yeah, so the way these conversations were structured, StoryCorps actually had a conversation roadmap. So there would be an introduction, there would be a moment for each participant to read the bio of their conversation partner from the first person. So it's literally like stepping into the shoes of another person. And all of those choices were kind of, I almost see it as like a way to disarm people so that you're kind of putting assumptions away, you're slowly letting the guard down. And then the first 4 questions are a little more personal. They kind of talk about like who are the most influential people in your lives? And that gets down to the granular personal aspect, right? Which is like we're all humans, we all have these formative experiences regardless of our political beliefs. So it's kind of structured to reach some common ground and places of understanding first, and then it veers into the questions around political beliefs. What made you think the way that you do? Do you ever disagree with people who are on your side? Or what do you wish others on the other side would understand about you? And there's always room for people to ask their own questions and ask follow-ups. But I think the StoryCorps has given that structure so that there's this balance between finding common ground, but also and finding common ground in a way where there's a foundation built so that when you're ready to start to get into the nitty-gritty of what's different or those diverging perspectives, there's a foundation of trust to start doing that. And as far as the conversations I've had, like I always saw that working. So it's almost like I think they've tried and tested this.
They've made it a science.
Yeah, it really seems that way.
So it seems like it's a much better process than, say, the process of how me and my family do things where, like, here's all the ways you've disappointed me. Here's why you're wrong, and I'm right. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the reaction of the participants. Was there hesitation before? How did they feel during, after?
There's a little hesitation in those first 4 questions as people got to know one another, and then, but like very quickly, like there were a lot of things that came out from those 4 questions. It's like, no way, we have this in common, or I can't believe you've been here, or you have this relationship going on. So that like Kamna said, it quickly disarmed people. But the biggest complaint we received from people that the conversations did not last long enough. There wasn't enough time, which I'll take that as the complaint for this project. It shows that people are really curious, and we had excellent conversationalists sign up for this. And a lot of people exchanged information so that they could talk after this program in order to be able to understand one another.
That's great. Kamna, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think Alex pretty much covered it. Yeah, I think the other complaint sometimes was that people weren't people felt they weren't different enough.
But they were.
But yeah, I would disagree with that. Yeah.
They just didn't get that. Like I was like, I was quite nervous going into some of these conversations because I was like, if they touch on this issue, they are on the opposite ends of this, but they didn't. They chose to focus on the things that they had in common, which shows that it can be done. It's not something that's been built into us as a habit anymore. We're too busy looking for what's different about us as opposed to what we have in common. And again, coming back to this, like the questions that are on the table in front of you, they help you reach for the commonalities because as Genesis says, like we do have more in common than we think.
Let me get to, and this is the final question I want to ask you here is, you've facilitated all these conversations. We're almost up to 25 conversations, and I think we're looking for a couple of more. But what have you learned from this project? What did you learn about the community? What did you learn about yourselves? What was the big takeaway?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think one for me was that I think we've been taught to look at disagreement as this like moment of people blowing up at each other or of frustration and anger and a lot of negativity with it. But I think what I learned a lot is disagreement comes out often, can also come out through nuance. And I say disagreement and I'm not judging that word. Like I'm just saying as when you see a divergent of viewpoints. And for me, I saw that the richest conversations happened when people could get to the nuance of how did I come to think the way that I do? What are the influences behind that? And what was really some of my favorite conversations are where people have kind of stopped and been like, well, maybe I could think about things a different way as well. And it just made me think about how quick we are to assume that disagreement needs to look like this angry, ugly thing, and that it's actually more of like in the way that I've seen it show up in One Small Step conversations, I think there's a curiosity that disagreement can kind of be formed into if we aren't always looking at it as some kind of like angry thing. And I think to the point where people complained that it was like we're too similar, I would be like sitting as a third party, I'm like, no, you have so many diverging points of nuance and difference. But I think because people almost want to get along, they almost don't always recognize that in the moment. So that was the biggest takeaway for me.
That's great. Alex, I think you get the last word on this one.
I think I've walked away more hopeful and renewed in my suspicion that people do want to get along. We had some of these conversations over Thanksgiving week, and listening to them in between the news and all of the typical sentiment that we hear in the news, it was quite jarring to hear two people really reaching for one another and enjoying having a conversation about something that can be typically quite difficult. And so it's not true. Like we think there is a lot of division in this country, but there is also a lot of quiet, like behind closed doors, a lot of quiet people trying to like do the good work of making sure that we still get along and we understand one another. And so it was a true privilege and a pleasure to be able to sit in these conversations. I love my job in this moment.
Well, I think I'm going to turn it over to Kamna right now, and she's going to introduce the next segment. So I'm going to take a back seat, and we're going to enjoy listening to some of these conversations. Thank you, folks.
I'm Amanda Carney. I'm 50 years old, as I just have that major milestone. I came in from Kirkland, Washington. My interview partner is Nathan, and we are participating as fellow citizens in the One Small Step project.
Nice to meet you. My name is Nathan Shelby. I am 38. I came all the way from Everett. The name of my interview partner is Amanda.
Nathan, you said, I would classify myself as socially liberal and fiscally conservative, a father to a wonderful little girl and husband to an amazing woman, celebrating 10 years this May. Family is extremely important to me. I am an avid shooter and enjoy many firearms-related sports, along with taking our boat with friends and family to our many local waterways. I am currently serving my second term on my city's animal shelter board and have served on other commissions, active in my daughter's school PTA.
Amanda, you said, I am a sister, wife, mother, employee, and small business owner. I was born in the Midwest, raised in the Mid-Atlantic, and reside in the Pacific Northwest. I find religion fascinating from a cultural, historical perspective, but am non-practicing. I believe that nature and quote-unquote God are synonymous. I am a passionate supporter of equal rights, a woman's freedom to choose, and rational gun control policy. I don't have much tolerance for people who won't work together for the greatest benefit to all.
So, how would you describe your personal political values?
Yeah, I think also kind of hard to answer. I would say, I think very much in the bio, I said socially liberal and fiscally conservative. I agree that part of the agreement of having government is giving up some of your liberty, your individuality for that collective good. And I think we've maybe swung that pendulum sometimes a little bit too far, but that is what it is. I am generally fine with everybody doing whatever they'd like to do, fine with a modicum of taxes in order to pay for those things. I have a harder time supporting government legislating morality in all aspects. To the left, to the right, it doesn't matter to me. Like, stop.
I'm curious, give me an example of where you think that legislation is getting into morality in a way that you think is uncomfortable.
So I think one example in this state is maybe in certain cases, DCFS has the ability to support a child in their transition treatment, potentially without the consent of the adult that's responsible for them. And I think it bothers me that the government thinks it's okay to remove the parents in some aspect. I understand wanting to support that portion of an individual's right to live their authentic self. My 6-year-old can tell me one thing, and like I don't understand that. And I have heard anecdotally, my nieces and nephews are in their early teens, and that I don't know if it's just the zeitgeist of the moment or similar, but their children at their schools are trying to figure out like which way they want to present, and I don't know if that's just we're getting folks that are kind of authentically doing that, or folks that are kind of like, oh, this is the neat thing to do, and I really don't want the neat thing to do folks to detract from the people who need authentically that support, right? Like, hey, if this is you and this is for sure you go do you, and we will give you all the support that we can, get there. But I think we're putting our thumbs on the scale, maybe one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard to do.
I think where we...
So did that answer it? I mean, like that...
It so does, yes,
yeah.
Thank you. It's so tough because I'm seeing this challenge that you're describing even in my work environment every day, which is good intentions. People have good intentions about wanting to help Nathan or wanting to help Amanda. And they come up with a plan that might help Nathan or Amanda, and then they just say, well, we'll just make this apply across everybody in that same set of circumstances, and they miss all the nuance.
Yes.
Right? And I'll give you a non-political example, return to office,
Mm-hmm.
right? For people who have been working virtually for 3 years. Most companies, they have one policy, no exceptions. Is that really rational? I don't think so, because the devil's in the details, and there are circumstances and a need for finesse in most situations. And in the example that you described, I think probably well-intentioned. I'd like to assume the best intention when people are bringing things up for legislation.
Mm-hmm.
But whoops, didn't think about what the downstream impact of that might be to other affected parties.
And it usually takes some sort of, really awful edge case to go correct it. And could we just avoid the awful edge case?
Yeah.
Like, that would be better.
And I think that gets back to what we were saying about smaller government, right? Like,
yes.
Instead of erring on the side of legislating everything, let's not legislate everything. Let's try to maybe make that, I don't know, it's like surgery should be your last resort. And I have so many days where I don't feel hopeful about where things are going, and I was really hoping that this would be one of those moments where I just feel hopeful.
I really like the quote that, you know, the arc of the universe kind of bends towards justice, and I think we'll get there. Sometimes slightly slower, I think, than some people want to bend it really quickly, but, you know, to drag society along with you, it's going to take some of us a little while.
All right, if we can invite Amanda to come up, I'd love to ask a couple questions. Well, I'm glad you could make it, Amanda. I know Nathan wanted to come, but was under the weather. So I'd love to start by asking you real quick, just like, how did it feel hearing that back? Now we talked to you, I think in July was when your conversation was. So I'm just curious what you're thinking now, many months later.
Well, I'll tell you, it was a really strange experience listening to the recording. And I think everybody can relate to that. You see yourself on videotape or you hear yourself on an answering machine. Okay, using that reference, I'm really dating myself. And it's discomforting, right, to hear your voice or see your likeness somewhere. So when I was listening to the interview in its full duration, I was trying very hard to forget that it was me that I was listening to.
That is hard.
With Nathan.
Yeah.
But it was great, and it actually took me right back to the moment, and I so enjoyed the conversation with him that I actually found myself able to really enjoy listening to the recording as well. So
I'm glad. Yeah, I know I threw that question at you, and it is always hard to like listen to yourself, you know, no matter how experienced you are with that. I'm really curious about what it felt like for you going into the room before the conversation started that day, and what your feelings were like about possibly talking to someone where there are diverging viewpoints. What was going through your mind at the time?
I was actually nervous, but I was really excited because I had an expectation of civility. I listen to KUOW regularly. I listen to StoryCorps regularly. So I had an expectation that it was going to be a very civilized discourse. I wasn't nervous about there being any contentious discussion with this participant. I assumed that if they were participating in this, that they were going to be open-minded and as intrigued by the experience as I was. I was nervous just about whether or not I would be able to participate in the way that the producers were hoping to get, you know, the kind of engagement and conversation that would be worthwhile. So thank you for the feedback that at least what we've contributed has been helpful to you.
We didn't have any ulterior motives. So as producers, there was no agenda there. I will ask you one more question, which is that I think you especially at many times, I think, demonstrated what it means to kind of reach in a conversation. How do you reach for someone? So I would love to hear more about just your personal kind of methods that you use to do that kind of reaching across. I think, like, you know, you've mentioned clarifying questions, but that just struck me in this interview. So I'd love to just hear how you do that, how you allow yourself to follow that curiosity.
Well, it's nice to hear you say that, but I think part of this was, for me, the benefit of timing. I have, in my work environment recently, been taking coursework on active listening. And it happened to coincide that I was right in the middle of that active listening training when I went into this experience. So I got to put some of that coaching into practice. But it's really been helpful in as it relates to the conversation with Nathan and every conversation I have with people every day, which is to try to be present when I'm having a conversation with someone and really listen to what they're saying and not fall into the trap of already thinking about my response while they're still talking, or having something that I just can't wait to say and I'm just waiting for them to stop talking so I can say it. And we all have sort of those patterns or inclinations, and it's been an effort to try to curb those and really just be present in the moment and really listen to what the other person is saying. And if I'm not sure what they're saying, instead of assuming, asking them to clarify. And I hope that I did that with Nathan in our conversation. Seek to understand is I think a big theme.
Well, thank you, Amanda. Any last thoughts? Anything else that you want to share about the experience?
No, just there was the little snippet at the end, which was an excerpt of just, I really did end up leaving the conversation with a little spring in my step. My husband is here, and he will tell you I was really excited about the experience after the fact, and it made me feel really hopeful, and so thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. I'm glad you're able to make it.
Thank you.
You just push it. All right, we'll move on to our next pair of conversation partners, Greg and Jeremy.
My name is Jeremy Wood. I am 35 years old.
My name is Greg Towery. I'm 72 years old. Let's read the partner's bio, as if I'm you. Okay, I am a Jew from a mixed Canadian Aboriginal European family. I lean towards being very progressive, but as a part-time judge, I'm also very interested in and concerned about public safety. I lived in the Middle East and France for a substantial time, studying in ultra-Orthodox institutions while organizing for Palestinian rights.
So this is Greg's bio. I am the older of two brothers and grew up in the Seattle area. I was not raised in church, but today, above all else, I am a follower of Jesus, not affiliated with any religious group. I try to live in line with his example. My brother-in-law was shot and killed by police when his car caught fire because someone said he had a gun. He did not. I'd love to hear more about your family. The loss of your brother-in-law, I'm curious what impact that had on how you look at police.
This Christmas, that'll be 9 years ago. The impact on our family, the things that we used to do at Christmas, we don't do anymore because it's a reminder of Christmas and then Christmas when Robert got killed. One thing I learned about it going through that experience, the police are not in any way equipped to deal with the families afterwards. It was horrible. You couldn't get information. It's not set up to help people, and that's a problem, right? Yeah. Myself, I understand people make mistakes, and if you're in certain situations, those mistakes can be deadly. And I have several friends that are career police officers, and every one of them I met with afterwards tell me that, and they all told stories about, this guy died in my arms. I didn't shoot him, but somebody else did, and they said no officer wants to use their weapon, but they always understand that at every time, my choice may be the difference between life and death here. And so I'm not mad at anybody. I wished that our structure and our society would have allowed me to meet this officer, because I'd love to hear his side of the story. Mostly I'm interested I don't want you to go into a situation in the future and make a bad decision because of guilt or whatever, right? I want you're not unloved just because you killed somebody needlessly. And it gave me some kind of street cred amongst my black friends, because it's like, well, I know what it's like to suffer this kind of loss. Ironically, some people don't accept it. Some black people not people that I'm close to, but people that I've encountered is like, well, that doesn't count, because you're white, right? And it counts. It's a family loss, and it's real and it's tough.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of that resonates with me. I lost a more distant cousin to police violence when I was very young. I didn't know him well, but I had another cousin who was in and out of prison growing up, drug issues, and then robberies to fuel his addiction, which has definitely colored how I view the courts and the law, but less so necessarily the police. But no, I have moments where how I view police is more anger, but in the better moments, I agree with you. I mean, I think that they're trained to perceive threats to a higher level than the rest of us, and sometimes those threats don't exist, and the results are catastrophic. You have to become so calloused.
Probably some kind of defense mechanism.
Yeah. As we've been speaking about this, I was thinking about my time in Israel, and I think it can be so difficult, obviously, to hold empathy and love for both, for lack of a better word, the perpetrator in an incident like that, and then obviously the victim.
Yeah.
I mean, that tension is hard enough alone, but when you're constantly surrounded by these calls to take a side. I mean, I had friends who had been shot by Israeli soldiers, and I had friends who were in the Israeli Defense Force.
Yeah, okay.
And I loved them both, and I might agree or disagree with them on certain things. But meanwhile, I'm living in a city that's in Jerusalem that's so much of the culture is about choosing a side in terms of religious practice or in terms of ethnicity or anything else. Then it gets so hard to hold that recognition that at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to do our best.
That's one of the things that I deal with a lot is Jesus said, love your enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Greg. Hi. Jeremy wanted to be here. Unfortunately, something came up at the very last minute, so he wasn't able to. So I get to ask you all the questions. Listening back to that now and hearing those bios again and thinking about that conversation, like, were you expecting to have as much in common or be able to have such a detailed conversation with Jeremy?
I don't think that I expected. I didn't really know what to expect, but I felt like with Jeremy, our conversation was very natural. You gave us the subjects to start us, but it just seemed like we're two new acquaintances that are almost like friends already. And I know my disposition is to cross barriers between people, and I think he's had that experience in his time in Jerusalem. So it's I really wanted to know about that in him because of that reason. It's like I know what this is to cross barriers with people that are adamantly against you, and I have some people that are pretty harshly against me, but I found it, if you just be kind back to them, that's something that's hard for them to do anything about, you know.
Did, you said how you felt like you were friends very quickly. Did this conversation go differently to how it would typically go with a friend or family member?
Not necessarily. There are certainly times when I deal with people that are completely contrary, and I have one friend that insists I can't stand to be around people that don't think like me, and I tell her I couldn't stand to be only around people that think like me. I feel like I would starve spiritually. So, yeah,
what do you get from being around people that have different perspectives?
Well, I get to understand how somebody gets to be where they are, and you can begin to realize that they're not so different from you that you might imagine. They might have come to different conclusions, but oftentimes when you know their story, it starts to make sense. And you look and say, I might be that same way if I was been through that same path, you know, and maybe there'd be things that you look and say, well, I would have done this or that differently. But when you get to know somebody for who they are and where they are, and you realize that everybody's carrying around some kind of brokenness, and some of it is so painfully difficult that they can have trauma from when they're young, that when they're my age, they still are dealing with it, you know, and it becomes really hard to fault somebody when you realize their struggles.
You were both very good when you touched on this, and for anybody that's listened to StoryCorps, like StoryCorps is about sharing stories, and that's how this conversation is set up. It's set up to share stories, to come to understand those perspectives. You were both very good at that. Is it something that comes naturally to you, or have you got, especially talking about your brother-in-laws and what happened to him, is that something that has taken quite a long time for you to be able to share in that way?
Not too long. I started talking about it pretty early on. Early on, we were trying to get information to find out how this could happen and what could happen, and you don't know what is being said. And that was really a difficult time. But once again, I just looked at this. This is another human being that I know. Excuse me, this is still emotional for me, even 9 years later. But I know he didn't go to work that day expecting to kill someone. And if he did kill someone, to find out after the fact that it was unnecessary. That's, maybe he's really hardened and callous and it wouldn't bother him, right? Because there are people that get that way. But none of the people I know were that way. So it's just something I began to engage people with right away.
And listening back to that conversation now, and it's been a couple of months since we recorded this conversation with Jeremy, like how have you thought about that conversation over the past few months? Like, what are your takeaways from the conversation?
One of the things sort of interesting is that I'd completely forgotten we even talked about that until I saw it on there. Oh, that's right. We did talk about that. Because all I was really thinking about is this, because of his background with Jerusalem and his involvement with Palestinians, I want to know what his take is on what's going on over in Israel today, because I know how painful that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have each other's contact information, so are you feeling more motivated now we couldn't attend this evening?
I would have called him, except for we were going to get together tonight, right? But okay, that's
well,
good.
I hope it's not the end of the conversation for the two of you.
No, it won't be.
Thank you so much, Greg. We have one final conversation to share with you. The next one comes from Janet and Michael. So Janet describes herself as an independent and Michael describes himself as a Republican. They are both Christians, with Janet working towards her ordination. In this conversation, you're going to hear about how political tensions have interacted with their faith communities.
Hello, my name is Janet Richards. I am 54 years old.
Hello, my name is Michael Albrecht. I'm 22 years of age. May I ask about your ordination? Because that's a pretty big thing.
Through COVID, and in particular, the George Floyd incident and a lot of the conversations that happened afterwards was really difficult for my family. And we took a long, hard look in terms of what community was walking with us in the experiences we've had. As a result of that, we joined the Free Methodist Church in South Seattle. Even though we live in Redmond, we travel to South Seattle. I'm currently working on being ordained because I want to create safe spaces where people can come together, can grow in their understanding of each other and grow in their understanding of God.
That's wonderful. Do you feel that the George Floyd incident of 2020, did you change churches during that time or because of that?
I did. So in our case, we were going to a church that had expressed a lot of love to us. My son has a very complicated medical history. We spent many years at Seattle Children's Hospital with him in and out of critical care. This church loved us, provided meals, prayers, so much love. We're still very close to many members of that church. But what we found in 2020 was when we expressed our pain around the experience of Black people in America and our concerns, in particular for my son who sustained a brain injury. And so we began to worry, like, what would happen if he had a police incident? Would they give him the benefit of the doubt, give him time to respond, or would they just react based on some assumptions? And what was heartbreaking to us is that our church as an institution could come alongside us very well when our son was sick. But when we expressed our experiences, they didn't know how to separate that from their ideology. Some were concerned that if they were to express sympathy for us, they would be betraying the police or betraying their political ideologies. And what was hard for me when I realized that was, none of the people who walked alongside me had experienced a son with heart failure and a heart transplant, but they were able to listen to me with empathy. But when I brought my experiences as a Black mother to them, they couldn't listen with empathy. And that became something that we decided we needed another place.
I think a lot of people prefer that the church doesn't make isn't very outspoken on political issues because there's not many intersections of the two. God wasn't about divisiveness. And Jesus wanted all people to share in his faith. That's just, I just feel really sad for that situation that happened to you. I'm glad you're with a church that better understands you and your beliefs. Being a gay Christian, a lot of evangelicals don't really understand how that works. In 2020, I found myself in a very dark place. I felt isolation due to COVID and attending school online. I wasn't able to focus on school online. I was starting to fail my classes despite being a really good student in a lot of high school and even in college. During this dark time, I actually met someone who is my current boyfriend. I think he showed me the way to a path out of that dark place in my life and a path to Christ, a reunition with Christ. And to me, like, that could not be unholy. When I speak with a lot of Republicans, most of them, if not pretty much all of them, are very strong Christians themselves. And I've never had actually any poor interactions with anyone about being gay or anything like that. My father always asked me, how can you be conservative and gay like that? You know, I can be me and have my beliefs, and people are just going to have to deal with it.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, as a person that's working to represent Christianity as a member of the clergy, it's really important that I hear stories like yours.
So, Janet and Michael, your conversation was one where I was incredibly apologetic at the end, that I had to keep interrupting and telling you how much time was left, and there wasn't much time left, and that we did have to end the conversation. How does it feel listening back to it? And like, this was, I wish I could play you the majority of the conversation. This was a delight. The two of you obviously are a delight. How does it feel to reflect back on the conversation?
Wow. You know, it was a wonderful time. I think we really enjoyed the conversation. And so it didn't feel like work. It just felt like sitting down with someone. I think we genuinely wanted to know more about each other and each other's experiences. And so listening back, it's like, I want to know more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because when I was talking to Janet, we're obviously two totally different people, both politically and just how we even look. And I found myself in agreement with so much of what she had to say during the conversation. And I don't think that's necessarily because of Janet or because of me, but because we, as people, we just want to get along with each other and better understand each other and understand our differences as well as what we have in common. But focusing on what we have in common brings us together. And there's a way that you can, view the differences in a way that can be spun as a positive, so that you really don't have to feel like we're actually all that different after all.
When it comes to disagreement and where you both sit, you both touched on how you had changed your mind about things. Could you talk a bit more about wanting to understand another person's perspective and finding where you found those similarities?
Well, in the audience is my daughter. I'm not going to look at her because she won't be happy that I draw attention to her. But, one of the times that I've had the most practice in changing my mind is with being a mom, because, you live your life, you have very strong opinions, and then all of a sudden you have someone who you love very dearly who believes something different, and you have a choice to make. Like, do you just dig in your heels or do you choose to listen and to maybe gain perspective. And so I would say my children have given me the most and the best practice, which has helped me with other people. I know now today I'm a lot better than I was, 20 years ago. I cringe at some of the conversations I had where I just knew I was right. And there was nothing you could do. I was proud of the fact that there was nothing you could do to change my mind. And I'm not that type of person anymore.
I know for a lot of people and a lot of their personalities based on the experiences that they've had, right? We're a product of our own experiences. And I think as we go through life and we experience new things, our personality should change, or our minds on things should change. It's really about growing as a person. And that's something I've always felt that I've had a moral obligation to better understand the world that we live in, to better understand other people, and to learn from that. I think in the days following the conversation I had with Janet, made me think reflectively on all the relationships I have in my life. Someone in the audience that is very dear to me is my best friend Sam, who I've been friends with since, I believe, the second grade. And Sam is wonderful, but he is a socialist. And very, very few things to agree with him on with those opinions. But I think that actually highlights something that's very important when you deal with people, is that even though this project, One Small Step, is based on politics, that's just a very small slice of who we are as people. And you can be very close to someone who has wildly different political beliefs as you, because that's not really what ties people together. It's shared values, shared interests. And I think that's why I found myself agreeing with Janet so often, is because we really didn't talk about politics much, because that wasn't important to us. We talked a lot about religion because she was moving up and becoming clergy at her church, and I'm always finding myself trying to become closer to God. And I think because we value those religion so much, we were able to focus on that instead of differences.
You also both talked about, this isn't in the conversation that we just had, but you both talked about running in non-partisan positions. Could you talk a bit about your own perspectives on the difference between national politics and local politics and what that means to you?
Yeah. 2 years ago, I ran for city council in Redmond, and it is a nonpartisan position, but the reality is it's very difficult to run even locally without aligning with a particular political party. The money, the support, the database, are there people to, send out flyers on your behalf, doorbell for you? All of that's connected to the political party. So I had made a decision. It was it was a personal one, that I felt that I could not represent what I stood for if I aligned with a political party. But it was challenging at every turn. I would face an obstacle of, how strongly do I believe in this, or do I want to win? And then you worry, like, if I compromise on this belief and I win, like, now I'm compromised, and I now don't have the ability to undo this now that I'm in office. And so I did run as a nonpartisan. I did not win. I don't think that was the only reason why I didn't win, but it certainly made it challenging. And many people told me I would have won if I would have clearly stated I was a Democrat. I think the difference for me and why I felt so strongly about it was in many of the issues that I would be deciding on, there was no clear indication that it was a Republican or a Democrat issue. And then the issues that people were sort of cornering me on, like abortion or gun policy, there's no decisions facing city council on any of those issues. So, I walked away from that proud of my run, but just really sad because I felt like the process is just not helpful to the conversations that need to happen in the community. And so, I'm hopeful more people will take that stand, but I also understand that there's a cost to taking that stand, and it's not an easy one to pay.
I ran for school board in 2021. It was a little difficult at the age of 20 to run for a position that's usually, older adults running for it or parents of children in the school district. But even though I'm very involved in politics and I have a passion for that sort of thing, I was quite adamant that it's a nonpartisan position. I wasn't going to talk about partisan issues, and I wanted to maintain a level of dignity to that role, to not relegate it to anything that was mirrored on a national level. And I think to better answer your question, the difference between local politics and national politics is that I was at an event a couple months ago, and Cassie Franklin, who's the Democrat mayor of Everett, said, "I'm not in the party of Democrat or Republican. I'm in the party of getting things done. Mayors are in the party of getting things done." And I kind of resonated with that because I was thinking, the topics that we cover on a national level and those kitchen table issues, those Thanksgiving table arguments, those are things that only really get handled on the national level. I got questions about gun control when I was running for school board, and
There's your timer.
Yeah.
Oh. How many languages are we going to go through?
No Portuguese. Anyway, so now I lost my train of thought.
I think you've got,
That's okay. I was almost done anyway. So
yeah. For anybody that is where this project is coming to an end, but do you have any takeaways that you'd like to give to anybody who's considering trying to just talk to somebody in their life, or like a stranger that they meet out somewhere that they think they might disagree with? Do you have any very quick takeaways that you might give them?
This project has been a wonderful experience, and I think every person who came up here and spoke about it would agree with that. But you don't need to be a part of this project to have experiences like this. You don't need a moderator. In fact, there was very little moderation because it was very conversational, and less of an interview and more just talking as friends. And so I think that's what you need to do. You need to be open with your friends. You need to represent yourself in a way that you feel comfortable with, and be open and be honest about what you believe in, but also be open to hearing, opposing viewpoints to that. And I think when we have more conversations like that, our country will start to feel more back to normal, I guess, again. I feel like, and I know a lot of people feel this way, 2020 kind of felt like it broke things a little bit. And politics, of course, has broken a lot of relationships prior to that too. But you need to look beyond the labels, look beyond the national issues, and realize that we're people who have just many different experiences, and there's a lot you can learn from other people's experiences.
Janet, 15 seconds.
Yeah. I think there's a reason why academia is often thought of as liberal, and that is because in an academic environment, you're sort of forced to be in a room with people who have varying degrees, and then but you share a common goal. You're trying to learn something, and so, I sort of have an aspiration that we create more spaces like that, but not necessarily academic spaces, but that we have maybe a shared goal, but that we come together and talk it out. So that's important.
Well, thank you both so much for talking to each other and talking to us this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, you got to get down now.
Yeah.
So as the library has informed us, we are coming to the end of this event. And for any of those who are wondering, like, what happens now? And how can I get involved and so on? Well, if you did sign up for the project and you didn't get to have a conversation, the participants from this project, of which there are many, they get funneled into the national program. So there's a chance that they might reach out to you. It just won't be that won't necessarily be partnered with somebody from Washington. You'll be partnered with somebody from across the country. And as we kind of touched on at the beginning of this program, we are really moved by this project in itself, and we're trying to figure out how we can have more conversations like this and create spaces for people to learn together. So stay tuned for something in the new year.
We also wanted to say that, StoryCorps worked with an organization called More in Common, and More in Common found out that 72% of Americans believe we have a responsibility to engage with people who are different from us. And they also found that the more that you think others in your community are trying to reach out across difference, then the more interested you or an individual becomes in doing the same. So we're kind of hoping that this project has planted a little bit of that seed for all of you today, so you can go forth and lead with curiosity.
Just want to mention, we worked with a group called Braver Angels. If you don't know who they are, they're a wonderful group, and they have chapters, I believe, in every state. And they help bring people across political divides. They call them blues and reds, and they get to talk to each other. So they have a really good podcast, actually, that's out right now. So it's really fun to listen to. Thank you for visiting. Please come again. There you go.
There we go with the Spanish.
So you can go to washington.braveangels.org, wa.braveangels.org to find the Washington chapters. Check them out. They're really great. And finally, you can listen to KUOW for more conversations. We've aired 3 of those conversations on SoundSide. You can go to the podcast and listen to that again. There will be more conversations that we will air over the next couple of weeks. So tune into KUOW for that. I want to say thank you to our participants, and thank you to all of you for attending today. Thank you to StoryCorps and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which funded this project. And finally, I just want to say thank you to all of my wonderful colleagues that made this happen. Alex, Kamna, Charlotte, Daphne, Hans, Rob, Gina, and Kate is here as well. So thank you all very much. I feel so privileged to work with you every day. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and I hope you were inspired as inspired by this as I am. So thank you. Good night.